In our upcoming mini-series, we're focused on MMM, or marketing mix modeling, versus attribution. Are they mortal enemies, best friends who love working together, or somewhere in between? This series asks 3 experts for their thoughts. This is part 2 of our interview with Mark. Welcome back to Attribution Nation podcast. I'm your host, Drew Smith, CEO and founder of Attributa. And we're joined again for part 2 with Mark Stouse, CEO and founder of Proof Analytics. Now, Mark, previously you had mentioned some things about the time lag component of B2B and how important that is to understanding, what marketing is working and what marketing is not working. Now, I want to go deeper into that, but before we do that, I want to kind of give a little bit of context here, that just in case anybody that's listening may not be familiar with kind of what we're talking about with B2B sales cycles, they are typically much longer than a traditional B2C sales cycle. B2C sales cycle, you see an advertisement for a pair of shoes, you click, you buy, it's pretty quick and easy. In B2B, you've got much longer sales cycles. Even when you're talking about, somebody that's brand new to this type of a product, you might be 90 days on the low end of a sales cycle, year plus on the longer side. If a customer is already under contract, or a potential customer is already under contract with one of your competitors, they might start researching a year, 2 years before their contract is even up, which means your deal cycle starts then and carries on for 2-3 years before you can close a deal. Also, there's so many different buyers involved in a B2B sales cycle. Again, on the consumer side, when you're buying a pair of shoes, there's one buyer. Even when you're buying a car or a house, it's 1 or 2 buyers. It's rarely ever more than 2 buyers. On the B2B side, you've got buying committees that are 5, 6, 10 people sometimes. So we have to understand the time lag of marketing on the B2B side, which is much, much longer. Now, and what this can mean is that for marketers that are spending money, they can spend money today, but they may not see any kind of return on that for 2 quarters, 5 quarters, in really long sales cycles, 8 quarters. So you've encouraged teams to actively seek to understand, forecast, and manage that time lag. So how can teams do that?
Well, it's a natural output of multivariable regression, for example. It's just part of the math, regardless of whether it's delivered through software like Proof or you're doing it in Excel, right? You're going to have to manage that, and that's going to be an output that you'll have. It is super important. It sounds like one of those things that's just kind of like, really, right? But it's actually, so I keynoted at South by a year or so before COVID, and the whole keynote was on time lag. It was called the CMO's greatest enemy. And the reason why it's the greatest enemy for marketing is that if you don't know the time lag, in other words, if you don't know how long it's going to take from the time you spent the money on whatever until the time that it begins to monetize in your favor, in your business, if you don't know that time frame, you will never find the value of that investment because you won't know where in the calendar to look for it. So it is the absolutely indispensable piece of information without which you're just toast. I think that the other thing I would just clarify for people is that the length of deal cycles and the length of go-to-market time lag are clearly related ideas, okay? But one is usually far greater than the other. So go-to-market time lags are going to be significantly longer than recognized deal cycle time. And the reason for that, as Drew said, right, is that you're going to be marketing well ahead of first contact. And you're going to be spending money that it's going to be kind of like hanging in the air Okay. And we're not talking about against one particular lead, one particular opportunity. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about in the aggregate, right? So the way to really kind of think about this, because I've had this conversation so many times that I've kind of gotten this down, is if you're a brand new startup or you're a company that hasn't marketed much at all, so you're starting from what's called a cold start, and you start to spend money in marketing in general and some on brand and some on demand, right? There's going to be a period where the effects of those dollars, the dollars themselves are not causal. It's what you bought with them that is either causal or not. Those are going to be kind of like traversing this great empty space that hasn't been filled up yet with any kind of marketing, anything. You've just started, right? So it's going to arc and it's going to be kind of like a bullet in the air, right? There's going to be a period of time when it hasn't hit the target yet. It's in flight. All kinds of things can happen to a bullet in flight. Strong wind hits the bullet, moves it over, right, in the air. Believe me, that actually really happens. That's not just some sort of BS analogy that I'm making up here. And so lots of things can change during that lag period. And then all of a sudden, right, things start to click. And it's one of those things, you can feel it when it starts to happen. It's pretty freaking obvious. And it becomes even more obvious when you are using analytics to project it, right? So my experience with the analytics is a lot like the GPS, right? You're driving along, right? And it gives you an ETA and a countdown to your arrival. And magically you turn into the parking lot in front of the restaurant and the clock goes to zero. That happens in proof. That happens in the math, right? That is the experience. So you will see in the forecast on time lag things getting very close, and things will start to kind of like almost like metaphorically, they'll start to shake a little bit in the marketplace. And then boom, right on time, right? A lot of that stuff starts making itself felt. Now, this is where consistency in marketing really means so much, okay? Because if you keep on spending the money, so you started spending it, right? So you launched all those first marketing efforts, and then you hopefully followed them fairly quickly with other marketing efforts. And so as you do this, right, you are filling up the gap, the time lag gap. So all of a sudden, from a customer's perspective, which is really what matters, okay, you're kind of like everywhere. Every time they turn around, they see you, right? You're like, wow, they must be really hot, and all this kind of stuff. And it's a hell of a confidence booster if you're checking out a new company and they're everywhere and everyone's talking about them. That's a big plus. Question at that point becomes, still for the CFO, they want to understand the ROI on every dollar that was spent. So even though you fix the problem from the outside in, you still have to account for it internally. And that's where the analytics are really.
Yeah, it almost sounds like the concept you're talking about is the similar kind of concept of when like you go buy a new car, and then suddenly after you buy that new car, you start seeing that car on the road everywhere you look. You're like, I've never seen so many of these cars until I bought this car. It's you suddenly have this inflection point with the branding where you start seeing it everywhere. And it's always been there, but in your brain, you didn't recognize that it was there until that inflection point happened.
It's like learning a foreign language too. Your ear all of a sudden gets tuned, right? And all of a sudden you hear conversations in a way that 2 weeks before you didn't comprehend, right? Because, it takes a while. And so to your point about the car, right? You're that image, that silhouette of that car you just bought is very much right here for you, right? And it's training data for your eyes. And so you're you're now seeing all the other matching patterns that are out there. And that's really what that is.
Yeah. Now, when we talk about this time lag that happens in B2B, a lot of that comes down to your point earlier, a lot of that happens prior to what we typically think of as the sales cycle, because it's happening before somebody enters your database, which is what I refer to as pre-funnel, right? Pre-funnel, before they enter the database. And a lot of that type of marketing is that brand marketing. And that's something that I know that, Mark, you've made a comment in the past that 90% of marketing impact in B2B is when brand investment, which is we're talking about this brand marketing, converts into brand reputation. Help us understand a little bit more what you mean by that.
Well, your audience is a bunch of percolators, right? And so they are listening and watching, but not as closely as you think, because, marketers are all a bunch of narcissists when it comes to our companies, and we think that everyone cares about our company as much as we do. And so, right. But okay. So they're watching, but maybe not with quite the alacrity that we all imagine. Right. And so they are saying, I hear what they're saying. I'm going to pick the positive side of this, right, to talk about. I hear what they're saying. And wow, you know what? The way I experience them actually is very aligned with what they're saying. And, I've been doing this now. I've been watching them for about 6 months, and it's pretty much like that. So I would say I can probably have a lot of confidence in the quality of their products and services, and I can probably trust them to tell me the truth. So then when I suddenly determine that I have demand for their services, because I believe that the analytics clearly show that customers are the demand gen engine, not marketers. So all of a sudden I will go, wow, I think, because something will happen inside my company, and I'll go, damn, maybe I need that proof analytics thing. Right. And then I'm going to go have a conversation with them, and I'm going to talk to them about it. Right. And I might buy it, or I might not, or, whatever. But they're going to be engaging with me or the company or some other company. And in the back of their head is going to be the overriding concern, which is risk. Dominates B2B. And the greater the sense of failure that attends it, right, the more risk will be felt. The more money at stake, clearly, the more risk will be felt. You mentioned the buying committee, right? If there's lack of alignment in the buying committee, the more risk will be felt. There's a lot of people that are placed in buying committees entirely to try to derail the deal. So you got to really understand some of this, right? It's kind of as logical as it is to some people. It's profoundly unhealthy in terms of the way that it actually works. And so you have to really learn to deal very effectively with risk in B2B. The sales guys see it up front, and they do a pretty good job just because they have to do a really good job. But B2B marketers, my experience, sorry, I'm not saying you suck or something like that. I'm just saying you don't do a good job understanding your customer's risk. I would say that you don't do a good job most of the time understanding your customer, period. Right? And it's not fun.
Yeah. Quotation fingers.
It's not fun. Yeah. It's not fun to market against people's sense of risk. You want to get them all excited. Okay. But here's one of the problems. I'm not saying it's actually true, but it is perceived as actually true. The more creative and the more fun the marketing is, the less credibility it tends to have inside of a B2B context. Now, is that just complete bull or what? Okay. But it is true nonetheless. It's true on the ground. It's true in real life, right?
Yeah. So there's a couple points here that I want to expand upon. So first off, your point about B2B marketers effectively talking to the risk factor. I think that's a super important one because psychology tells us that people are motivated by two things in a lot of buying decisions. People are motivated by two things: opportunity, like my ability to gain, right? And also risk mitigation, like anti-risk. So, and psychology would also tell us, if I'm remembering correctly, I could be wrong, but if I remember correctly, the majority of people are more risk averse than gain motivated. So they're more motivated by avoiding risk than they are motivated by gain. It's why there's fewer people than in the world that are entrepreneurs than working for entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurship is accepting risk, a lot more risk, but for more potential gain. And more people are risk averse. So I think that B2B marketers, to your point, need to address that risk that their buyers are going to be taking by purchasing your product or your services in their marketing. Now, the one that I really want you to go in more detail on, you had a really spicy take here that I want to focus on, which is you said your customers are your demand engine, not your marketers. Let's go deep on this. What do you mean by that, Mark?
I mean that, so whatever the number is, right? We've heard 5%, we've heard 3%. You know, it's definitely single digit numbers, okay, in every case, of your ICP is actually in market for your product at any given time, okay? So if we dissect that, if we look at kind of the logic of that, which I don't deny that statement, it's probably true, it's in that zone, that means that marketing as a demand gen originator sucks, right? If that's all of your ICP that you can motivate into a buying attitude, right, at any given moment, what does that tell you? It tells you that you're not really having much impact, right? And it's not because you suck, it's because it doesn't work that way and it never did, right? And the only reason why it appeared to, say, from 15 years ago to about 5 years ago, is that there was so much free money out there that everyone was kind of like trying it all, man. You know, we'll just do it all, try it all. We'll just see what happens. No big deal. That was not a true reflection of reality. So now what do you have? You have the truth, which is it's really important that as many people in your ICP be aware of you in general as possible. That's just a given, right? You want them to have more and more and more unaided memory of you, because at some moment in time, they're going to have a situation at work. They're going to be in a meeting. They're going to have a conversation with their boss. And all of a sudden, the demand that they did not feel for your services or your product, suddenly they will. They have now moved into that 5%. And if there's pain attached to it for them, they've really moved into that, right? So you need to understand, number one, that when they say we want it to be easy, what they're really saying, because they all know intellectually most of this stuff is not easy. What they're really saying is, I don't want any more pain, right? And particularly if you are selling to certain functions within a company, marketing, IT, data science, even certain parts of HR, right? These are people that live more or less with the frog in the boiling pot, right? They are in pain to some degree most of the time, and they just don't want any more. So that's what they're talking about. So make it easy for me, make it painless for me. It's not because they really think you can. It's because it's more a statement of where they are than where they think you can be, right? But you gotta acknowledge it. This is our story at Proof. This is our story, 100%, right? And this is where market timing also enters into the picture. Market timing, I'm going to get to Proof in a second, but market timing is everything. Like if you have it, you are invincible. And if you don't have it yet, you're going to have to wait until you do. And the difference is, in my experience, so COVID started to change people's perceptions of their need for causal analytics, because all of a sudden everything was changing and past wasn't prologue anymore. And everyone was kind of like, holy crap, we need something that can help us look around the corner and down the road and do it with accuracy and all that kind of stuff.
The big pivot of March 2020.
Absolutely. And even I would say for us anyway, and for most of analytics, more like August, September of 2020, right? Because people had to live with the consequences of all that upheaval for about 6 months before everybody started going, whoa. And then 2 years ago, when all of a sudden interest rates went through the roof relative to where they had been, and new cash was a lot more expensive and a lot harder to get, which meant that the opportunity cost on existing cash went like through the freaking roof, and the risk levels on how CFOs spent that cash, was like the ultimate pucker factor. That's when, for Proof and companies like Proof, market timing just suddenly swept in, and it was just like, wow, right? And it's kind of like, really, and particularly if you're a guy, but I guess if you're also a woman, you can relate to this. It's like if you have had the longest time in the world where if you felt like nobody wanted to go out on a date with you, and then all of a sudden, for reasons you don't entirely understand in the moment, it's like the whole world turns around and wants to date you, right? That's sort of what it feels like when you have market timing.
Yeah, when I think of market timing, I think of two perfect examples that both come from COVID, which is Zoom. Zoom had perfect market timing for when COVID hit. And Peloton. Peloton was, they were doing their thing for a while, but then as soon as people couldn't go to the gym anymore, Peloton was, that was perfect timing for Peloton, because they were established enough that how many people do you know went out and bought a Peloton bike when COVID hit? I personally know tons. And so, I think that's a great example of that market timing concept.
They also had to fight both ends of it though, right? Because it created a huge demand signal for them. So they were selling bikes like crazy, but also it was disturbing their supply chain just monstrously, right? And so deliveries got really impacted for a while. So it was the best of times and the worst of times for a lot of companies.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, so you just talked about something that's really interesting, which is the current state of how expensive money is with interest rates and things like that. Are you finding that teams are struggling to justify the cost for software like Proof, or do you find that CFOs and the folks that hold the purse strings are finally kind of understanding it?
Yeah, it's actually, the story of Proof is the story of a lot of things, but one of them is absolutely the psychology in marketing teams. I think that marketing teams, so you were talking about earlier about how, there's everything you can gain from something, and then there's the risk associated with it, the fact you don't want to lose something, right? I feel like that marketing teams have been so beat up and beaten down for such a long time that they have become somewhat fatalistic in this area and cynical to the max, right? And so what we started finding is that for us to get the kind of business performance that we needed, we had to start selling more and more to finance teams who really cared about understanding the effectiveness and efficiency of the entire go-to-market envelope. And at the same time, so this last couple of years, the return of the budgetary business case is kind of like a corporate artifact. Suddenly all that came back into vogue. A teams needed a way to process those business cases at scale and maintain, update and maintain the forecasts in them. So we became far more horizontal in some respects than we had been before. We most of what we still do is go to market, but we do other things as well. And so it's one of those things where it's honestly been a struggle for me personally, because I end up feeling almost like the malpractice lawyer, right? And that's actually not what I wanted to be at all when I started Proof. I wanted marketers to really see what the truth was and what I had personally experienced, what my teams had personally experienced over a number of companies. And I really wanted them to I certainly wanted to make money off of it, but I wanted them to get the freedom from using it, right? And for a long time, that was like leading a horse to water, and you can't make him drink. You just can't, right? And so you pivot, right? And you pivot to the people who felt different levels of grievance towards marketers who were just fine, thank you very much, with an ability to hold people accountable and all that kind of stuff. And it was actually pretty interesting, because the way it's really gone is over and over and over again is like this. So we will demo to a finance team. The finance team will immediately understand what's going on in the software, and they love it and they get it. And then they're kind of like the first among equals on this whole deal. And they start sending out data requests to marketing and to sales and to customer success and to product and to anybody else they care about. And it works really well, because nobody ever says no to a data request coming from finance. I mean, you just don't do that, right? Not if you want to stay employed. So it works, right? You get data mobilization really fast, and you can see that finance is getting all excited, right? Because they're going to put the screws to all these people for the first time for real, and they're just so excited about it. And then the analytics come back, and lo and behold, look, the 80-20 rule is alive and well for a reason. And so roughly 20%, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, right, of go-to-market spend is underperforming or non-performing, and thus can be redeployed somewhere else. And the other part of it is usually killing it. The average finance team kind of says to itself, wow, I kind of thought it was going to be the other way around, right? So they're a little nonplussed. And the marketers over here, who have been all completely freaked out, right, are now lighting cigars and essentially congratulating themselves and saying things like, no lie, I actually heard this, we did okay given the fact that we had no ability to know for sure, right? And you're kind of going, yeah, you actually did have a way of knowing for sure. Even before Proof, you had a way of knowing for sure. You just didn't go there, right? And I think that actually that's one of the greatest challenges for a lot of marketers in B2B today, is that they have spent their entire careers never knowing for sure exactly how everything that they do actually works or doesn't work. And that's a powerful statement. I mean, that's powerful. And I think some of them, I had one CMO say to me, I'm scared to death. I am scared to death. And I said, yeah, I understand. She goes, well, let me tell you why I'm scared to death. I'm like, great, tell me. She's like, I'm scared to death. I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm scared to death that the analytics are going to tell me that the 30 years that I invested in B2B marketing was a waste. And I thought, you know what? God bless you for just putting it out there, right? That's the truth. That's how you feel, right? And then I said, look, I can just tell you that's not anything you have to worry about. I mean, it's just really not.
Yeah, I mean, I think accountability is scary for people generally. Like when somebody comes in and says, "Hey, we now actually have a way to measure the performance of what you're doing in a really, scientific way that's really doesn't leave any doubt." People get scared. They get nervous, which is a great segue into my next point, which is, we're talking about things like marketing attribution and causal analytics and multivariable regression, which the vast majority of marketers, and I say this not to say anything negative about marketers, but the vast majority of marketers got into marketing because they like concepts other than math. They like graphics, they like storytelling, they like language, they like branding, they like social media. They don't like math. And so they avoid the math.
They hate math.
And so, yeah, they hated math, but they were really good at drawing and art. So marketing made a lot of sense, right? So they avoid these concepts, and two, they don't really truly understand these concepts. First off, would you agree with that? And then second, how do we get marketers to get over that fear and start embracing these things a little bit more?
Yeah, it's a really great question because, number one, fear is very real, but that does not mean that it's founded in any kind of logic. So just last week, I was on a large panel with the CMO of Pindo, Chernoff. Really nice guy, super nice guy. But he made a statement that was it was totally indicative of this, right? And it's totally wrong. I mean, it just is. It's objectively completely wrong. And that is that analytics kill creativity. Actually, a hell of a statement given what Pindo does for customers. And and I was just saying, but actually it doesn't. Education, knowledge, whatever other words you want to put on it besides analytics, right, powers creativity, right? It energizes it and gives it force. And people like Leonardo da Vinci wrote about this very dynamic a lot. Well, why did they write about it a lot? It's because even back in the 14th and 15th and 16th centuries, right, there was that belief. Too much science will kill your faith, your religious faith. Too much science will kill your artistic creativity. I mean, there's just all kinds of stuff back and forth. This is such an old argument, but it's an argument that never went anywhere. Like, the people who assert it have just been shown to be wrong over and over and over again. Yet it persists. Why? It doesn't have anything to do with knowledge. It has everything to do with being accountable for an outcome. If you believe that creativity is just wow stuff that's really cool, makes people feel a certain way, but is otherwise not accountable for anything, least of all a business outcome, right? Then you're not going to like analytics very much, right? But if you say, hey, my job in the most engaging, creative way possible is to help many people buy this thing, right? So that they want to have it. And by using analytics and by using research, audience research, marketplace research, to better understand the whole thing, I can have a better creative idea that hits more in the center of the target of the audience and makes them want to do this. Okay. How in the world is not a good thing, right?
Yeah. Do you think that this lack of understanding mathematics and big data and concepts like that is hurting marketing teams' ability to understand what's working and what's not? And then secondarily to that, do you think that, software like Proof kind of helps increase that accessibility to the marketers that may not be naturally attuned to math?
Yeah, I do. I do think both of those things. I hope on the second one about Proof, I hope very much that we have done our job well enough in terms of stripping down causal analytics to its very, very essence without breaking any data science rules, right? And making it very, very understandable to normal people, meaning the outputs, so that they can make a better decision. That was our entire goal. Like if we could do everything else in the product perfectly, and if it was seen as not helping, if normal people in business teams couldn't look at the screens and say, wow, I understand what's happening there and I know what to do next. If that doesn't happen, we're screwed. We might as well just go home, right? Because none of the rest of it matters. And so I think that the challenge has been that marketers are among the least well-educated in this space, particularly B2B. B2C is a whole nother story. They live and die by these kinds of analytics. They own the 4 Ps. They have either own or have a very close relationship with the P&L. It's just completely different, right? But in B2B, yeah, and what makes it sort of worse, what has turned, so I just did 488 interviews with Fortune 2000 CEOs and CFOs for my book on go-to-market. It's about go-to-market from their perspective. Not that it's always the right perspective. It's just, And so they were, you listen to what they say and they talk about the memes that they create and circulate amongst themselves. And the biggest ones are all about marketing, right? And like one of them is, and there's several forms of it, is all the times that marketers throw around business terminology incorrectly, trying to sound cool, trying to sound knowledgeable, right? And they just rake us over the coals when we do that, and I was actually having a drink with one of these CFOs after we'd finished the interview. Most of these interviews were done on video conference. This one wasn't. And some of his colleagues came into his office and they kind of got brought into the conversation, and it was a giant pile-on, right? I mean, it really was. And you were kind of sitting there going, okay, some of these are actually pretty funny, but they're not funny.
Yeah. I'll share one of those where I was one of those people that threw around a business term and got mocked for it. So I was early in my analytics career, and I was talking about marketing's influence on revenue. And I was presenting a deck to a CFO, and that CFO in the middle of the presentation says, marketing hasn't touched revenue. I was like, well, sure. Here's the data that shows it. He says, no, that's not revenue. That's bookings. Revenue is checks. It's money and deposits in our bank account. Marketing hasn't influenced a dime of revenue on this deck. So everything you have here is wrong.
So that's a unique reality for a enterprise software.
Yeah. I was very humbled by that CFO in that moment, and I can guarantee you I've never made that mistake again. But those are the types of things, to your point, that marketers get made fun of sometimes, is saying like, well, yeah, you influenced revenue. No, you didn't. Revenue is different than what's shown on an opportunity in Salesforce, because that's not revenue. So I want to move on a little bit more to some other topics here. But one of the things that comes up all the time when we talk about analytics in B2B is, and this is something that B2B marketers have been told for years and years and years, is that most B2B companies do not have the requisite data to be able to do MMM or causal analytics properly. And that's why the majority of B2B organizations have not really gone down these paths. So is that true?
It's actually a core question that I investigated in my book interviews, and the part of the answer transcends marketing. So particularly in startups and scale ups and things like that, but also up into some enterprise companies, right? The emphasis was on how fast can we escalate this thing, how fast can we hockey stick, and how fast can we exit, And when you're doing that, when that is your primary motive, a lot of the other considerations that normally go into creating a sustainable business are not top of mind, right? So like having enough data would be one of them, right? Measuring very much of anything really, has been a fairly like last decade sort of development. Even in the first 5 years post 2008, it was pretty dicey in a lot of companies in terms of data availability of any kind. I mean, not just go to market, but I mean, but let's just take go to market for a second. How many listeners who are marketers or salespeople have ever looked inside of their CRM and blanched because there was so little data in that CRM, even though supposedly the rules of the road for the sales teams were everything gets recorded in the CRM, and yet it's not happening, right? Which is a leadership failure. That's a sales leadership failure. That's a CEO leadership failure, right? You should always be willing, if you're given the order, then you expect the order to be fulfilled. And if it's not fulfilled, somebody needs to pay the price so that everybody else gets the message. That's a really hardcore way of looking at it. But in large corporations, that's pretty much the way it has to work. And in many cases, it doesn't. And so not only does sales really not have a corpus of data in its CRM that it can use, but all of a sudden finance is going, what the hell, right? How in the world do I even project what quarter is going to look like, right? And then the marketing team doesn't have anything to run models with, right? So, I mean, it just dramatically compromises the whole thing. Now, having said that, last 5 years, totally different kind of situation. Not only are more companies measuring more things than ever, but we are in the golden age of stuff that's just measured on spec. Even, pretty much, I would say it stops in kind of halfway through the mid-tier of companies. But from the upper part of the mid-tier through the enterprise, there are companies that are measuring things all the time on the global 2000 and the next 4,000 companies in the mid-tier. They're doing that constantly and selling it to them on a subscription. So data availability is not the issue. But even more importantly, and I think that this is actually core to your question, a lot of B2B companies would report out monthly. And so they get used to thinking about data as a monthly artifact. And there's only 12 of those. And so anybody who knows anything about the number of opportunities that are needed to make even something like regression work, they know that it takes a lot more than 12. What they forget is that in almost every instance, it's not that the company measures that thing on the 29th of every month and no other day. They measure it every day. And the monthly report out is a roll-up. So if you peel it back, you just instantly got 30 observations per month. You got 360, 370, right, per year, per whatever is being measured, right? So under that basis, you absolutely have enough data. But to show you really quickly, just kind of going back to what we were just talking about knowledge, understanding, I've lost track of how many times I've been in a call and the marketing team will say, well, we're in the middle of our big data initiative, but we're just really concerned about whether or not we'll have enough data to run proof. And you're like, okay, so regression is a lean data tool, lean data math, right? It's
lean data, not the company. Lean data, a mathematical concept.
Right. That's correct. And so if you can't handle the data requirement for proof, you will never succeed in your big data initiative. And that's an example of people who are pursuing things largely because they're hot in the market and they want to be a part of that, and that's totally understandable, right? But they don't know that the requirement for a big data initiative is easily 80,000 times what they need for proof or anything like proof, right? So it's just kind of one of those things where the data requirement is just not a problem. It's just not. And particularly, what's really cool is in the last 6 months, ChatGPT-4 launched a new synthetic data creator that does a gorgeous job. I mean, if you've got the right prompts, right, you can end up with a, fantastic data set. It can fill in. So let's just say you have natural data, but it has holes in it for some reason. You can load that in and it will fill them up with the most highly probable bridges of synthetic data, right? And it's just fantastic. I mean, we're doing and seeing our customers do more and more entirely futuristic blue ocean type analytics, causal analytics, using data from ChatGPT-4, because they'll say, hey, we want to model something that has never, ever happened yet. So, but we can describe it. It's kind of like science fiction, but we can describe it. And so they describe it to ChatGPT-4 and they get that data set. And then they'll say, okay, ChatGPT-4, we need to understand steps that would be necessary to connect this science fiction outcome with this reality that we currently have. And ChatGPT-4 will do that. Now we'll need all the data sets to support each one of these steps. Boom, 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 right? And then all that gets loaded into proof and modeled. That is some amazing stuff. That's now how you start to model how we're going to change the game. It's like the ultimate what if.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. All right. So Mark, we've talked a lot about all these great mathematical concepts and all this stuff that marketers can do. And a lot of that is powered through proof analytics, but we haven't really talked much about proof analytics and what it is and what it does. So tell us a little bit about the tool and who proof analytics is right for.
So the whole goal, proof analytics is sort of the natural outgrowth of the previous 15 years in which I and others on my team progressively became analytics-led marketers. And we did it with great success in very large, complex, long cycle, highly regulated companies like Honeywell Aerospace. And as we solved our problems, we started to realize that there was actually a whole layer of problems, challenges below that were manifesting themselves in what we were doing. And we were kind of like, wow, you know what? That's kind of like the existential layer of the problem. So in a nutshell, the challenge that analytics has in business, any part of the business, doesn't matter. Any kind of analytics, doesn't matter. It's how do we operationalize the analytics at the clock speed of the business? So this is a question of relevance and timing. And is data science, data analytics turning into decision support or not? Now, the problem is that if you look in the average company that has a data science team, they are kind of commonly thought of as a day late and a dollar short with their insights, right? And they will come rolling in to a meeting and they'll say, hey, got some really cool stuff. And everybody will say, man, we made that decision like over a month ago. Like, sorry, it's just not even really like relevant anymore. So also it's typically a relatively small operation, data science. And so scaling it to serve all parts of the business, really challenging. The cost is part of that. That's really challenging. At Honeywell Aerospace, I was spending $8 or $9 million a year just in this area and never got any pushback at all for it. But you didn't, it's pretty obvious that the number of companies who would be willing to sign up for that is a very short list. It kind of was somewhat of a career issue, right, of sorts. And then the general understandability problem. I mean, you flash data science outputs, generated by data science tools to a business team, they're going to look at it and go, what the hell am I supposed to do with that? Right? It's Greek to them. We thought to ourselves, hey, you know what? The thing we got to do here is we got to start a software company, and we need to build a platform that takes everything that we know and distills it into software. So not just the math, because actually the math is the math is the math. There's not a lot of creativity in the math at all, and you don't really want there to be a lot of creativity in your math. But how do you collaborate across firewalls between clients and agencies securely, with everybody still maintaining data rights management? Okay, so that's a whole separate little work area, kind of a block of work that has to be done. How do you create a UX that makes this really friendly and really understandable to a bunch of people who, as we said earlier, generally speaking, don't like math? They're okay with charts, by the way. Research shows you show business people, including marketers, charts, no problem. You show them graphs, big problem, right? So then, okay, so what do you do with that? How do you, because you can't just say no graphs. So then you've got to say, okay, I'm going to have to kind of like stylize these graphs. I've got to present these graphs in a way that is very comfortable to them. And in our particular case, it's the GPS, right? It's navigation. It's navigating your direction to this particular business outcome. So I do think, so if what makes people a proof customer is really today nothing more than I am ready, willing, and scared to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. And we priced it so that price is not an issue. And, that was, we had a really famous technology leader. I won't mention his name, but he's really well known for being the master of commoditization. And he personally designed our pricing model, which was extremely cool, and so you're not sitting there going, wow, I'm like scared to death. I feel all this risk. And they're asking me for, $500,000. Are you kidding me? Right. So that's not it. Right. So we want you to try it. We want you to stick your big toe in the water. Right. But most importantly, we want you to be successful. We have actually prioritized our entire ICP around no churn. So like if we think that you are probably going to churn in a year, we won't sell you the software. We will offer to sell you some consulting from us or one of our partners, right, to kind of help you get into a different place. But we don't want to screw up your life, right, by having you churns on software expense. Where's the glory in that, right? So we want you to be successful. We have created a software package that can make you really successful for not a lot of money, because we also know that you don't have a lot of money right now. The finance guys are the least of your worries on this. They're going to totally get behind it, and they're going to totally think that they're going to be like just eating your lunch with the results. And then you're going to have the incredible pleasure of showing them otherwise.
I love it. That sounds, it sounds awesome. Our listeners are going to be really happy to know that the price point shouldn't be problematic, because obviously everybody cares about price. So, Mark, I usually like to close these out with just kind of a rehashing of some of the things that I took away that I think are the most important things, at least from what I noticed to share those with the listeners here. So I'm going to kind of just go down the list here. First and foremost, one of the things that makes MMM and causal analytics different from multi-touch attribution is that MMM is probabilistic in nature. It takes in multiple different variables, including some of the external variables that we don't control as marketers. Economic conditions, a butterfly flaps its wings in Argentina, a hurricane hits, wherever, that type of stuff. Multi-touch attribution in MMM or causal analytics really aren't competitors. As a matter of fact, they work really well together. MTA data specifically can be really, really useful in the models used by MMM and causal analytics. When we're explaining these concepts to the C-suite, it's really helpful to use analogies. Like I loved your analogy about probability, really, about talking about dropping rocks off of a bridge, right? Are we going to hit a person? Well, there's so many things that it depends upon. So that was a great analogy there. And then also measuring go-to-market success, kind of like a GPS that, sometimes you need to reroute. And the models that we use and the data that we use can help us re-navigate due to road closures or some other external factors that, again, we may not be in control of. B2B marketing really suffers from short-sightedness in terms of company growth and reputation. Marketers are measuring things monthly, and particularly when you factor in things like time lags, that can create discrepancies in the results that we're seeing versus what's actually happening. Your point here I love about your customers are your demand gen engine, that your customers don't get into market until they're in market. And sometimes those factors happen, and it's completely outside of the control of marketing. Marketing had nothing to do with people becoming in market, although sometimes we think we did. And then lastly, that I think is really important for our listeners here is most B2B orgs are a lot more ready for MMM and causal analytics than they think they are. That they probably do have enough data to start this process, and that the rumors and the traditional conversation that B2B orgs don't have enough data really aren't really that accurate and that true.
No, totally.
Yeah. So Mark, thank you so much for joining. This is so far the longest episode, or maybe even 2 episodes of Attribution Nation podcast. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I've just, I love talking to people that are passionate about what they do and really, really, smart about what they do. And you definitely embody both of those things. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Drew. I've really enjoyed it.
I probably could have talked to Mark for another 2 hours, to be honest with you, but we're going to move on. And in episode 3, we're going to be talking to Ryan Hobson. He worked in analytics at Adobe, but saw a gap in their product offering and decided to go create his own company to solve for it. And that is Align BI. So thank you for listening to this episode. Like, subscribe, give us a 5-star review, and connect with me on LinkedIn. And as always, let me know if you'd like access to our private group where we keep a lot of these conversations going.